December 17, 1944. The Ardennes. Snow drifted across a lonely road outside the Belgian village of Aywaille. The war was in its fifth bitter winter, and on that frozen morning, Sergeant William Creel of the U.S. Military Police stood at a makeshift checkpoint, just another small link in a vast American front line stretching through the forests. A jeep approached through the mist. 3 soldiers sat inside, uniforms crisp, helmets dusted white with frost. They waved casually, spoke English well enough, and carried the right papers. But something felt off. Creel had heard the rumors spreading like wildfire through every platoon. The Germans were dressing as Americans. They were driving captured jeeps, changing road signs, and giving false orders. It sounded impossible, even absurd. But the war had reached a stage where the impossible happened daily. He stepped forward and asked for the password. A pause. Too long a pause. The driver's reply carried a strange rhythm, an accent he couldn't quite place. Then Creel noticed the weapons British-made Sten guns, not the American Thompsons that every patrol carried. In a heartbeat, the atmosphere changed. Rifles raised. Orders shouted. Within minutes, the 3 Americans were on their knees. Their olive-drab jackets stripped away to reveal field-gray tunics beneath. Their names, Manfred Pernass, Günther Billing, Wilhelm Schmidt, German Commandos, captured in the act of deception. That single arrest would ignite one of the most extraordinary security crises of the Second World War. Because these men were part of a secret mission, personally authorized by Adolf Hitler, an operation that blurred the line between soldier and spy, between uniform and disguise, between the rules of war and the chaos of survival. Over the next 2 weeks, paranoia would spread faster than the German advance itself. American soldiers would interrogate one another at gunpoint, demanding answers to questions no textbook could prepare them for. Who won the 1940 World Series? What's the capital of Illinois? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? And a single wrong answer could mean arrest, or worse. This is the story of Operation Greif, the mission that turned the Battle of the Bulge into a psychological war, where knowing the color of a baseball uniform could save your life. October 22, 1944, Hitler's military headquarters, Rastenburg, East Prussia. The war was slipping away. Soviet armies were closing in from the east, the Allies from the west. Inside the wolf's lair, the Führer paced before a map cluttered with colored pins and frontline markers. His voice, still sharp, still commanding, broke the silence. Skorzeny, I have a mission for you. SS-Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny stood at attention. Tall, scarred, and infamous, he was already known as the most dangerous man in Europe. Just a year earlier, he had led the daring glider assault that freed Benito Mussolini from captivity atop the mountain at Gran Sasso. More recently, he had kidnapped the son of Hungary's regent, forcing that nation to remain loyal to Germany. Now, Hitler wanted something even more audacious. The Allies were pressing toward Germany's borders, and Hitler envisioned one final counterstroke, a massive armored offensive through the Ardennes forest, aimed at the Belgian port of Antwerp. If successful, it would split the British and American armies and force a negotiated peace. But this time, victory would depend not just on tanks and artillery, but on deception. The Führer leaned forward, his voice low. To capture the bridges, to mislead their troops, you will wear American uniforms. Skorzeny hesitated. The order was extraordinary and perilous. Under the Hague Convention of 1907, any soldier caught wearing the enemy's uniform could be executed as a spy. He reminded Hitler of this. Hitler brushed it aside. You will remove the uniforms before combat, he insisted. This is not treachery, it is strategy. The mission's code name was Operation Greif, Griffin. Its objective: infiltrate American lines disguised as GIS, capture key bridges over the Meuse River, and spread confusion so deep that the enemy would doubt its own identity. Skorzeny was to form a special unit, Panzer Brigade 150, made up of English-speaking Germans trained to impersonate US troops. They would steal jeeps, repaint German tanks to resemble American Shermans, and sow chaos from within. It was a plan that blurred the boundaries of warfare and would soon blur the minds of thousands of American soldiers who could no longer be certain who was friend and who was enemy. In late October 1944, across the ruined landscapes of Germany, a strange summons began to circulate through the ranks. Typed orders, stamped with the authority of Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, called for volunteers fluent in English and familiar with American customs. Few understood what it meant. Many thought it was for translation duty or intelligence work far from the front. But those who answered soon found themselves behind barbed wire at a secluded camp in Grafenwöhr, eastern Bavaria, a base sealed under such secrecy that even the guards were forbidden to speak of it. Here, under the personal supervision of Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's most dangerous commando, a new unit was taking shape. Panzer Brigade 150. Its mission: to fight a war disguised as the enemy. The recruits were a strange collection. Some had lived in the United States before the war, waiters, mechanics, sailors who had once worked in New York or Detroit. Others had learned English from textbooks or movies. A handful were school teachers or translators. Most had no idea what they were walking into. When the truth emerged that they were to wear American uniforms and operate behind Allied lines, many froze in disbelief. The language barrier was disastrous. Of the 2,500 men assembled, only a dozen could pass as fluent. Fewer still understood American slang. Skorzeny's staff soon realized they were training a brigade of imposters who could barely ask for directions in English. In one report, a frustrated instructor wrote, "The results are terrifying. The men are learning to say sorry and pretend to have diarrhea when spoken to. Even the uniforms were a problem. The request for captured Allied gear produced chaos. Warehouses sent British, Polish, and even Russian clothing. Some jackets were splattered with blood or stamped with large Peace for prisoner. Of the 15 Sherman tanks Skorzeny had asked for, only 2 arrived, both inoperable. The rest were German Panthers hastily repainted olive drab, with crude white stars brushed on their armor. From a distance, in fog or darkness, they might have fooled a nervous young sentry. But by daylight, the deception was laughable. Still, the training continued. The best English speakers were grouped into small units called Einheitsstilau, infiltration teams that would travel in captured jeeps, posing as American MPs, engineers, or supply drivers. For weeks, they studied American habits. They learned how to salute like GIs, how to smoke Lucky Strikes, how to lean casually when talking, how to curse with just the right rhythm. Captured American soldiers at nearby POW camps became unwitting tutors. Movies like Gone with the Wind and Yankee Doodle Dandy were screened to teach slang and accent. The men practiced American conversation, baseball scores, Hollywood actors, state capitals. They rehearsed the proper way to pronounce Chicago, how to talk about Yankees versus Dodgers, and who Clarke Gable's wife was. Skorzeny knew the odds were against him. He had less than 6 weeks to train an army of counterfeit Americans for one of the most ambitious deception operations in modern history. But failure was not an option. Hitler wanted a miracle, and Skorzeny had a reputation for delivering the impossible. As the snow thickened over Bavaria, the men of Panzer Brigade 150 drilled by torchlight, marching in American formation, testing their newly forged papers, and reciting American slang into the darkness. Most knew they were marching toward a mission from which they would not return. December 14, 1944. As the first flakes of snow drifted down across the Eifel Hills, the men of Panzer Brigade 150 gathered near Bad Münstereifel. The forests were silent, cloaked in winter mist. Beneath canvas covers, jeeps painted in crude olive drab stood ready, their white stars still wet with paint. The fake Shermans, really German Panthers, idled nearby, their engines rumbling low. At 1600 hours, on December 16th, the German army launched what would become its final great gamble of the war, the Ardennes offensive. 200,000 troops surged westward through the dense Belgian forests, striking thin American lines stretched across an 80-mile front. The artillery barrage shook the frozen earth. In the half-light of dawn, Operation Greif, Griffin, slipped quietly into motion. Otto Skorzeny's disguised commandos moved behind the spearhead divisions of SS General Joachim Peiper's armored columns. Their mission was simple in theory, impossible in practice: infiltrate the American rear, seize the bridges over the Meuse River intact, and plunge the Allied command into chaos. They moved out in small teams, 3, 4, sometimes 5 men to a jeep, each group carrying forged identification, counterfeit orders, and American weapons. The best English speakers led the convoys, practicing their cover stories as they rolled through the snow, military police on reconnaissance, engineers rerouting convoys, staff officers checking roads. The cold bit through their stolen uniforms, and tension hung thick in the air. One wrong word, one slip of accent, could mean execution. For the first hours, the deception worked. Confusion reigned in the American lines. German troops driving captured jeeps waved casually at startled GIs, shouting, "Hiya, buddy!" and "Which way to Malmedy?" One team redirected an entire US armor column down the wrong road, sending tanks rumbling straight into gridlock. Others cut telephone lines, switched road signs, or spread false reports of German breakthroughs where none existed. But by the evening of December 17th, the illusion began to crack. Peiper's advance stalled at Elsenborn Ridge. St. Vith held firm against furious German assaults. The timetable collapsed. Without a breakthrough, Skorzeny's men were trapped behind enemy lines with nowhere to run. That same day, near the Belgian village of Aywaille, 3 supposed American soldiers were stopped at a checkpoint. Their English was hesitant, their weapons British, their boots wrong. When the MPs searched them, they found German field grey beneath the olive drab. The men were Manfred Pernass, Günther Billing, and Wilhelm Schmidt, members of Operation Greif. Their capture would ignite the most intense wave of paranoia in the history of the US Army. Within 48 hours, every road in Belgium bristled with checkpoints. Every soldier was questioned, every convoy was halted. The battle for the Ardennes had become not just a struggle of tanks and guns, but of identity and trust. Skorzeny's audacious deception had entered legend, and chaos had taken hold behind the American lines. The news spread like wildfire. 3 German infiltrators, captured in American uniform, had confessed under interrogation to a secret mission, one that supposedly reached the highest levels of Allied command. Their story was simple, terrifying, and believable enough to send shockwaves through every division headquarters in Belgium. They claimed that Otto Skorzeny's disguised commandos weren't just misdirecting traffic or sabotaging bridges. Their true objective, they said, was far more ambitious: to infiltrate Allied Supreme Headquarters and assassinate General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Whether the prisoners truly believed it or had invented it to buy time, no one could say. But once the rumor reached Allied intelligence, it spread faster than any German tank could move. By the morning of December 18th, the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe found himself effectively imprisoned inside his own headquarters at Versailles. Guards doubled. Identification procedures tripled. Roads around the compound were sealed. Every visitor, every officer, every courier was searched and interrogated. For 5 tense days, Eisenhower was kept under virtual house arrest. Furious, he protested that a general who hid from danger was no general at all. But the orders stood. Until the infiltrator threat was eliminated, the Supreme Commander would not be allowed to move freely. Across Belgium, fear took command of the American rear areas. Military police set up hundreds of checkpoints. Convoys that once rolled through the night were halted under glaring headlights. Troops dismounted and lined up, freezing in the December wind, as MPs fired questions at them that no training manual had prepared them for. What's the capital of Illinois? Who won the 1940 World Series? Who's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? Where does the Chicago Cubs play? The questions sounded absurd, and that was precisely the point. They tested not military discipline, but cultural instinct. Real Americans could answer without thinking. German imposters could not. Yet the system was chaotic. Many genuine soldiers failed the tests. General Omar Bradley himself was detained after an MP insisted Chicago, not Springfield, was Illinois' capital. Brigadier General Bruce Clarke was held at gunpoint when he mixed up baseball leagues. British officers fared even worse, baffled by questions about Mickey Mouse and Frank Sinatra. The interrogations sowed confusion and resentment. Commanders were delayed, convoys misdirected, and reinforcements slowed. Every soldier became both suspect and detective. The paranoia reached the point where men refused to share cigarettes or coffee until identity was proven. The irony was brutal. Skorzeny's infiltration teams had caused minimal direct damage. A few road signs changed, some lines cut, a handful of false orders issued, but the panic they unleashed paralyzed tens of thousands of Allied troops for days. In the end, only 23 German infiltrators were ever captured. 17 were executed by firing squad before the year was out. But for weeks, the specter of hidden enemies haunted every checkpoint and crossroads in the Ardennes. The battlefield had shifted not on the map, but in the mind. By late December 1944, as snow blanketed Belgium, a quieter drama unfolded behind the front lines. The American army began trying to capture infiltrators from Operation Greif. German soldiers caught wearing US uniforms during the Battle of the Bulge. On December 21st, Manfred Pernass, Günther Billing, and Wilhelm Schmidt faced a military tribunal at Henri-Chapelle. The evidence was undeniable. American uniforms, American weapons, German field gray beneath. Under the Hague Convention of 1907, their deception stripped them of prisoner of war protections. The penalty was death. The trial was swift. The men insisted they had only followed orders and had not fought in disguise, but the court ruled that infiltration alone constituted espionage. 2 days before Christmas, the sentences were carried out. In a frozen clearing, white targets were pinned to their chests. Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer Adolf Hitler!" Moments later, the firing squad fired. Over the next week, 13 more members of Operation Greif met the same fate, tried, convicted, and executed at Henri-Chapelle and Huy. By year's end, 17 men had been shot for violating the laws of war. Their bodies were buried near the battlefield before later being reinterred at Lommel Cemetery, among 39,000 German dead. Their commander, Otto Skorzeny, was captured after Germany's surrender and tried at Dachau in 1947. He faced identical charges, but was acquitted after a British SOE officer testified that Allied commandos had used the same disguise tactics. The court ruled that wearing enemy uniforms for infiltration if removed before combat was a legitimate ruse de guerre. For the 17 men executed that winter, the verdict came too late. Their story remains one of the most haunting episodes of the Battle of the Bulge, where deception met justice in the snow. In military terms, Operation Greif was a failure. No bridges over the Meuse were captured, no major depots destroyed, no command networks permanently disrupted. But in psychological terms, it was one of the most effective operations of the entire war. By posing as Americans, Otto Skorzeny's men had weaponized fear itself. Their brief presence behind the lines unleashed chaos far beyond their numbers. The capture of just a handful of disguised commandos convinced Allied headquarters that infiltration was widespread. Overnight, Belgium and northern France were filled with checkpoints. Every jeep, every truck, every convoy was stopped and questioned. Soldiers who should have been fighting the Germans in the Ardennes were instead interrogating one another on back roads. Simple movements that once took hours now took days. Fuel convoys sat idle as MPs quizzed their drivers about baseball teams, Hollywood stars, and state capitals. The paranoia crippled communication and delayed reinforcements at critical moments. General Eisenhower himself was confined under heavy guard for nearly a week, forced to remain inside his headquarters for fear of assassination. Across the front, commanders operated in confusion, never knowing whether the man giving orders was a superior officer or a German imposter. Skorzeny hadn't needed to destroy bridges or fuel dumps. He had achieved something more subtle. He had made the Allied army doubt itself. For weeks, the front lines shifted not only through gunfire but through suspicion. Every soldier became both defender and detective. Every question, who won the World Series or where's Wrigley Field, became a test of identity, a password for survival. Operation Greif's legacy was not measured in territory or tonnage, but in fear, the kind that spread silently through an army, changing how men look at one another forever. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was ending. The German advance had stalled, their fuel exhausted, their divisions shattered by relentless American counterattacks. Hitler's final gamble in the West had failed, and with it, Operation Greif faded into history. Otto Skorzeny's disguised commandos achieved little on the battlefield. They captured no bridges, destroyed no major installations, and gained no lasting tactical advantage. But their psychological impact was immense. For weeks, Allied troops had looked at one another with suspicion, questioning uniforms, accents, even simple gestures. The paranoia his operation created spread faster than any German tank column ever could. After the war, Skorzeny was captured and tried for war crimes at Dachau in 1947. He stood accused of violating the laws of war by sending his men into combat disguised as Americans. Yet the tribunal acquitted him, ruling that deception without direct combat was a legitimate ruse de guerre. It was a decision that outraged many, especially when 17 of his men had already been executed for the same act. Skorzeny later escaped custody and lived freely in Spain until he died in 1975, never expressing regret for his actions. Today, the story of Operation Greif endures as one of the strangest and most controversial chapters of the Second World War, a mission where deception replaced firepower and culture became a weapon. It revealed how deeply shared identity could serve as both shield and sword. Americans who knew their own culture instinctively could spot imposters where no uniform check could. The men of Operation Greif failed militarily, but succeeded psychologically. Their story reminds us that in war, perception can be as powerful as bullets, and fear, once unleashed, can change the course of battle without firing a single shot.